Do you ever look through your plots before publishing a paper and wonder which ones were drafts, which ones you needed to update, and which ones were final or ready to go? Well, this week I'm going to show you a neat trick using Decorators to make your life a lot easier. Welcome to another MetPy Monday. Hello, I'm John Lehman, a software engineer for Unidata. This week I wanted to show you a trick that I've come up with, which does have some disadvantages, but I think the advantages greatly outweigh it, to mark figures as drafts or final or any other stage that you want that could be for your paper, your thesis, your dissertation, whatever you'd like. And I think you'll see why this is useful when I show you how it works. So first I'm going to do some imports, NumPy, so we can make some fake data, and of course, matplotlib.pyplot as PLT since we're doing plots, and we'll use matplotlib inline magic for the notebook. Now, one thing that I found very useful when I was doing my PhD was to make each of my plots, or figures for a paper, a function, and then just call that function at the bottom of my notebook. So I could do all my data processing, and then when that's all done, I just call a function that makes the plot. It made it very easy to know where in the notebook I was going to go look to change my plot code and so on. Also, if you made it into a script, all of your plot functions for that paper could be in that script or that notebook, though generally I had a notebook per plot. So let's go ahead and make a simple plot. I'm going to call it make my plot as a function. And I'm going to create a figure and an axis using plot.subplots. I'm going to create some data here using linspace from 0 to 2pi. So we're obviously going to use some kind of trig function. I'll give it 100 points. I'm going to use the sine function, and then we'll plot x and y. And if I wanted to be fancy, I might return fig and ax in case I wanted to do something else with them later. Okay, so if I call the make my plot function, we get a plot. It's pretty standard. Now, how would I mark this if it were a draft? This is especially useful when you're going through a figure deck for any document, really, to know which ones everybody has agreed this is the final version and we're going to submit it, and which ones we're still working on, which ones are drafts, or which ones need corrections or proofs, and so on. So what I'm going to do is actually use a decorator to do this, and we'll end up writing two decorators, and you'll see why. I'm going to insert a couple cells here. Remember, a decorator is a function that takes a function, contains a function, and returns a function. We've talked about decorators pretty extensively before in previous MetPy Mondays. All right, so I'm going to make a decorator called draft, which is going to be for my draft figures. Inside, it's going to contain a function called wrapper. And then I'm going to use the fig.text to put the word draft. I'm going to put it in the center of the plot in figure relative coordinates, so it'll be in the center of the figure, really. I'm going to give it a pretty large font size. We'll make it gray. The horizontal alignment, it's going to be the center of the text at 0.5. The vertical alignment is also going to be the center of the text at 0.5. We'll give it an alpha of maybe 0.35, 0.4, somewhere in there. Rotation of 45 degrees, or let's shallow that up a little bit because we might have a longer word. So let's say 25 degrees actually. And then, of course, a transform to get to figure relative coordinates. So there's adding our text. Now, this isn't complete, of course. How are we going to get this wrapper to know our figure from down here? And this is going to run before or after this function. You got to think through a few details here. So let me show you how I approach this. And again, if you are not familiar with decorators, I encourage you to go back and watch those previous videos, and this will make a lot more sense. So the choice that I made was to pass a figure size to the decorator and have the decorator create my instance of the figure and then give that instance of the figure to my plot functions. So I'm going to take a figure, which means this is going to become ax.subplot. So we'll take a figure in, we'll make our axis, and we'll do our plotting and all of our other figure work here. Our wrapper is going to take some function func in. I want to run that after I put the draft on so that any plot is over the draft, not the draft over any plot. Okay, so we need to make our figure here. And this looks pretty good, except for my figures are probably going to be lots of different sizes and shapes, especially if I'm trying to fit into some of the weird nooks and crannies in journals. So I'm going to make my draft decorator. I'm going to use star args, star quargs, so I can pass some things to it. I'm going to pass the star quargs into, or unpack them into my plot.figure call. And then down here I'm going to, of course, return wrapper. Now we've got our fig there. I'm going to add my decorator. And in my decorator I can specify the fig size. I'll use 8,4. So it's adding our decorator, puts the word draft, and runs our plot function. Well, that's pretty useful. But what are we going to do when we go to the final version of this and we don't want to mark it as draft? We still need to create our figure, which our decorator's handling for us. So what I do is create another decorator. I call it final. And I just don't add any text. So now I've got my draft figure. When I'm done, so maybe I've got to do some changes here. I'm going to change the color to be tab green. Okay, now everybody agrees that they like this figure. I'm going to mark it as final. And we get the same figure, but no draft across it. And when I'm scrolling through my notebook, I can see very clearly that we have finalized this figure and we are happy with it. So this is not really the traditional use of decorators at all, but I think it is a useful one in the context of preparing your papers or other documents where you're going through multiple stages with figures. I hope that you found this tip useful, and I'll see you on next week's MetPy Monday.